You know, the president is quite typically referred to as the chief legislator as well as the chief diplomat, commander-in-chief, and so forth, because he has a privileged position in the American mind, as even though there is no formal provision of a national leader, there is a kind of informal understanding, certainly these days, that the president is the leader of the nation, and as that, has an opportunity based on his connection with the American people and also based on his party affiliation to get a hearing on the Hill in a way that nobody else does. A regular citizen, the Bill of Rights allows me, and it allows you, and it allows anybody else, our neighbors, to proceed to Capitol Hill with an idea to get enacted into law. It's not likely to happen. There are millions of 300 or 400 million other people who have the same right. They're not in the same position the President of the United States is, who's gone before the American people and been elected. And that electoral connection is the thing that gives a president a privileged position when it comes to activity on Capitol Hill. In addition to the fact that most of the time, somewhere on the order of 45 to 55% of the people who are there are sharing a partisan affiliation with the president and therefore inclined at the outset to give the president a hearing. Beyond that, particularly when it comes to foreign policy, the presidency has a vast intelligence apparatus. I don't mean just the CIA or the national security agencies. I'm talking about diplomats and so forth who are there to feed ideas into the White House, and the White House is a great winnowing agent. It takes these ideas and parses through them to find the best ones, and then if a president puts his imprimatur on something and makes it a priority of the White House, it is far more likely than under any other circumstances that will become a priority of Capitol Hill as well.
Presidents participate in the legislative process through creating priorities and then working with members of Congress, members of their own party primarily, to influence them to introduce bills that reflect their agenda and their priorities. So it's very important. I think the best model of this is LBJ, he was president, and the best part about his presidency was that he had also been the majority leader in the Senate. And that experience and understanding how the Senate operates and how Congress operates more broadly is very helpful for a president. He also had the enviable quality of enjoying schmoozing with members of Congress and trying to twist arms and elbows and trying to trade favors and doing whatever he could to implement his agenda. Presidents who eschew schmoozing and presidents who sort of don't want to look at the other branch and try to work with that other branch oftentimes find that their 4 years in office or their 8 years in office can be very difficult.
The legislative presidency is in part based on what happens in the negotiations around the actual drafting of legislation itself as it moves through the House or the Senate or through the committees within each chamber. But also, legislation doesn't end with a president's signature. It then moves into the implementation phase. And so conversations that presidents have with the Congress during the drafting phase of legislation help inform and help set up barriers and guidelines around which the law will ultimately be implemented by federal agencies. And so while we think of legislative efforts as we think of law as being focused largely in legislation, the implementation, the administration of the law is as important as its drafting, or in some cases more important than its drafting. So the discretionary power of the president to spend, the ability of the president and the administration to produce regulations, the ability of legislation to be guided by administrative orders or executive memoranda, those are all important components of the president's effect on legislation, either ex ante, before it's passed, or ex post, after it's passed.
The Congress often will delegate responsibility for a particular policy area to a federal agency. The theory on this is that you can't possibly, particularly in a modern industrial, post-industrial world, modern computer age, electronic age, you can't possibly, through a form of legislation, predict all the various iterations that a policy will have to take within an agency. And so what quite frequently has happened is that Congress will delegate those responsibilities to the agency to sort of figure out the details. We're gonna provide you the broad framework of what we want national policy to be, and as long we need you to find specific how this will match up to reality in specific instances. When the presidency comes into a place, and this is first routinely designating the heads of those agencies or departments, so that if you've got a reform of the healthcare system, the president's going to have somebody at the Department of HHS or whatever who's responsible for sort of monitoring that and figuring out how to execute it. And so he has his imprimatur on the department there. But also has the usually the legal wherewithal based on this congressional delegation to go in and make interpretations for himself if it's something that the president himself has a particular opinion about.
Congressional oversight is important, especially in an arena such as the president's spending power, but in any area that the president has discretionary power. Because what discretionary power ultimately is an informal relationship, almost an unwritten contract between the Congress and the executive branch to say, I trust that you will administer policy in a way that is acceptable to us. Well, typically, Congress doesn't trust the president, so they need some feedback mechanism to make sure that the administration isn't abrogating what it's supposed to do. And so oversight hearings or other types of investigations can happen in Congress to make sure that the type of behavior that the executive is engaging in is acceptable to the legislative branch. There's also reporting requirements and other types of testimony, either formal or informal, that Congress can request to make sure that money is being spent wisely, that staff is doing what they're supposed to do, and ultimately that what Congress says should happen through legislation is actually happening through administration.
There is a situation of so-called iron triangles where the relationship between the agency and Capitol Hill and the interest groups exist. And I do think those are instances where it's difficult for a president to have an input, because if the president goes in and says, I don't like policy A, it needs to be policy B, and the agency is claiming policy A is a privileged position, what the agency will routinely do is go back on Capitol Hill and talk to the committee chairman and say, look, I'm getting heat from the White House now, I don't really want to deal with this. Then the people on Capitol Hill will go to the interest group who has an interest in this, the National Association of Manufacturers, and say, look, the president is pushing on this, you need to mobilize your interest group communities on this. And they often can push back very successfully on a president on this. So it's erroneous to say that the president is truly the chief executive in everything, because the political combat that goes on to design policy within an agency continues after a policy is adopted based on the existence of these iron triangles, the fact that the interest groups and the people on Capitol Hill have their own interest, and also in the fact that the experts in the agencies have their own independent interest to protect in terms of what they see the agency should be doing.